I mean, that's one point that it makes, sure, that this life is not all that there is. Another point that it makes is that this life, I should say, this creation, this universe, is itself valuable because God is redeeming it, which goes against the notion of I don't know if annihilationism is the right word. The idea that God's just going to
Yeah,
destroy
yeah,
everything
absolutely.
and then just create something new. That's actually not an idea that's
Yeah,
present in the scriptures, unless you really take things out of context and read apocalyptic literature through a pretty literal lens, which is a horrible way to read apocalyptic literature. But regardless, the point is that Jesus Christ, as a part of the material world, had his material nature resurrected. Remember, it was an empty
yeah,
tomb. His body was not left in there, and God created something entirely new out of entirely different matter. Um, God resurrected that which was physical and gave it, restored to it a physical, material, living existence.
yeah.
Now,
It's a different.
obviously, in the sorry, what?
No, no, just you're right. Everything you're saying is so right. It's a different kind of material existence.
Yeah, because we do see after Christ was resurrected. I mean, there's some interesting things. I mean, let's just look at it a little bit. We could spend a lot of time on this, but first off, like he was physical. Like when he showed up to the disciples and Thomas doubted, and beforehand Thomas says, "Well, unless I can see the nail marks on his hands and put my hand in his side, like I won't believe." Jesus shows up, presents himself to Thomas, and Thomas actually touches him. His hand doesn't go through his body, like he actually feels a physical thing, which Thomas would have experienced before, living together for however long the disciples lived together.
Touches it.
Traditionally, 3 years. Some, I guess, are saying it was just 1 year, but regardless, however long it was, they would have known that Jesus was always like physical. Like, I don't know, giving him a hug, shaking his hand. I don't know what that looked like.
When he
Um,
washes your feet, you know.
yeah, like Thomas would have recognized if something was off, like with Jesus' physical
It is hard to
existence.
carry fish and what is it? The fishes and loaves without hands. That would make that a very difficult thing to do
Yeah,
that without physical hands.
yeah, absolutely. And on the matter of fish, like Jesus also ate after he was resurrected. Like the disciples, see him on the shoreline when they're out fishing. He's cooking
Mhm.
fish, um, and he ate with them. Other people recognized him, so like they knew who it was. This is something. Also, I told Britt this during when we were doing prep. I never thought about this before, but the two men on the road to Emmaus after Jesus' resurrection, Jesus just shows up, starts talking with them, and they don't think anything of it. Like to them, he's just another guy on the road. So his resurrected body was not like this glowing, just sort of crazy supernatural thing. Um, it looked like you or me. It looked like just any other person. Now, it obviously interacted with the world in a different way. Jesus was able to walk through walls. He disappeared in one place, then he showed up in another. So certainly, resurrection brings about something uh, in him that caused him to interact differently with the physical world. Um,
Yeah.
and we could certainly get caught in the weeds talking about what all that means. But just suffice to say, it was a bodily resurrection, um, which, again, as Paul says, is the first fruits of our resurrection. So if we want to know what resurrection life is going to look like, Jesus exemplifies, in part what it's going to look like. Um,
Exactly.
but but it also illustrates, like we've already said, that this physical creation is not being abandoned. It's being redeemed and resurrected, which also plays into, again, how we view our value, the value of our lives here. So one of the things I've really gotten into over the last few years is gardening, and I'm not going to lie, one of the big reasons I'm a fan of gardening is because I know that after I die and I'm resurrected, I'm going to be a part of creation. Um, so I'm like, why not
That's
learn how
cool.
to garden now so that I can garden in the future? Like, why
Yeah,
not?
that's cool.
But also like contribute to the earth. And there's nothing wrong with going out and hugging a tree. I know we sort of already talked about this in one of our first podcasts. Obviously, don't worship creation, but recognize that this creation is valuable, so much so that God is resurrecting it. He's not just going to resurrect us as people and like our souls. He's resurrecting the physical material universe as a whole. So there is something valuable to be said about um, uh, people who, how do I want to say this? So I guess I'll put it this way. So several years ago, before I really understood much about resurrection, I never understood how a Christian could be an environmentalist because I grew up in a similar context that you did,
Yeah,
which is
it's all gonna
that
go away anyway. What's the point?
yeah,
Burn
it's
it
all going to
down.
go away. So who cares about how fossil fuels are affecting the environment? Who cares about how littering and all that stuff? I mean, the only thing I really cared about littering is it messes up the aesthetics of a place. But I never really
Exactly.
saw the value of environmentalism. But then I, began to actually pay attention to what Scripture was talking about, and it's like, no, like this world does matter. So, and we are the stewards of creation. We should be able to take care of it. So, uh, yeah, and that affects how we understand our role too. That it's not just about our relationship with other people; it's also about our relationship with creation as a whole, which you
Yeah.
kind of touched on.
No, no, that's amazing. Like, man, I think what you said is so good. Like, and that's what I want to stress. And we probably just don't have the time to go into all the implications of what this means to live a life built on hope, and like to
Yep.
understand what the life of like living a life that is built on the hope of the resurrection, what that means, right? But like, Ben, let's just call that what it is. That's to some extent, it's a political decision in the United States, right?
Mm.
To be
Yeah.
like pro environment versus less pro environment, I guess is the way to put it. I'm trying to put this gently, and I'm doing a really bad job. But your Christian thought informed that because you had a new understanding of that. So you may not have necessarily changed parties per se, but you're going to live your life a little differently than you would have otherwise. And this might even be like a small implication of what Paul talks about, or is it Paul or Peter? Resident aliens. That's Peter. Wow.
I'll go with you on that. I'm not for sure off the top of my head right now.
Sure. The passage about resident aliens. I'm fairly confident it was Paul, but now I think it's Peter. Now I'm just second guessing. Ben, I really hope you edit this podcast. Or put like an asterisk of like this. Don't judge Jordan. Uh, but like when they talk about being a resident alien, right? Like you're part of this world, you participate in, you live in it, but like you're just a little different,
Hmm.
right? Like you just kind of have a different relationship to the culture than other people do because your values can't just be black or white or left or right or
Hmm.
this or that. Like you serve a different king, the risen king, right? And
Yeah.
so like you can I don't it's gonna feel like a la carte, I think, to some people, but it's not.
Hmm.
It's you are following somebody that lives a very different life. And so that wasn't supposed to get political, but it was supposed to just talk about the way you live your life. You know, for some of our listeners that's at a college campus, right? Like
Hmm.
you may just not always be about everything that everyone on your campus is about, and that's okay. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't be about some things. Like you can't, like support some causes. If you're, a more adult listener and you've got a job and you're working, maybe it's how you participate and interact with your coworkers, like what you talk about, what you're willing to discuss, um, or even, where you want to give your money if you have any, like those kind of things. Like it changes your activities. It's a big deal. I know
Yep.
that's like a really big short change because I'm trying to dance around this in a nice way. I think there's some really like this is a podcast that could easily be like a 2 or 3 part series, like where we could just talk about the implications of the resurrection.
Oh
But
yeah.
what we really want to go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ben.
And I was gonna say, if you really want to explore that, then just look up NT Wright, and you'll
Yeah,
you'll have enough to think about for a long time.
fair enough. Actually, yeah, we should probably just get this out of the way. A big chunk of my resurrection thought is built on two thinkers, and I think that they're both really good. They're both well, one of I guess both are Anglican. Yeah, they're both Anglican. So one C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, I used to give a lot of grief to because I used to call him a bad theologian, and that's probably true because technically he doesn't like articulate like a theologian and hit the philosophical points in the right way and like consider all the
Mhm.
implications. Like in terms of like technical theological writing, he definitely falls short. In terms of being just an amazing Christian person, he excels far beyond any other author I've ever read. Just
Yeah.
gonna say it, you know. The second
That's a good
person
way to
is
put it.
NT. Yeah, thanks, man. So really good reading resources for C.S. Lewis if you're really trying to understand this. Like, start with the Chronicles of Narnia because he's going to lay out his simple understanding of Christianity in a very obvious and laid back and easy digestible way. So if it's literally like baby's first Christianity. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Like, his whole point, he didn't want to like make you work for it. He wanted to tell you what he was believing. This was his proclamation, but he
Mm.
wanted to do it in a way that was engaging to kids because they have. I think children have trouble conceptualizing first century Palestine in like the first century Palestine. That's not a
Yeah.
dig at the Bible. It's just hard for kids to grasp that versus a fantastical story about a talking lion. Seems I don't know why that seems a little more palatable, but it is. Um, but that's the first set, and then the second thing is C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce or Mere Christianity. Both of those lay out a really good case. I'm sure there's some other books
Mm.
I'm leaving out that are really good. I think Problem of Pain kind of gets into it a little bit, but I really think the Great Divorce is one that really illustrates the idea of heaven super well in terms of like
Yeah, it
resurrection. What do you
yeah,
think,
it's
Ben?
it's a bit obscure for sure, The Great Divorce,
Mhm.
but is certainly worth the read and it's worth the think.
Yeah,
Definitely. Like
it's
it took
short
me
too.
a few times reading it before I actually understood some of the points he was trying to make, and then now I'm like, that's a really good book.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I actually am not a well, I wasn't I am a big reader now, but I wasn't a big reader in college, which is a very ironic thing to say. I tried to read as little as possible and learn as much as I could of the little I read to pass all my classes.
Yep.
So don't do that. But I did do that, especially when I was reading The Great Divorce my freshman year of college, because I just had that like, you know, typical high school pass good grades mindset. I didn't really care about like learning the material until I got a little bit older, by my junior year.
Yeah.
But The Great Divorce I read in an afternoon. It's not a long book. It's actually not even that difficult of a book, but
Mm.
it's that engaging. It's dense in the thought that you're gonna have a lot to think about, and you're not gonna catch it all. Like you're just not. It's just not possible. But and so you're right. It's a great reread, but it's an easy read. So if you don't want to be intimidated, and you want to try to start thinking about this stuff and engaging with it. It's a fun story to kind of do to read that you can take a couple days on, an afternoon on, and just engage with it and wrestle with it. It's fun. Um, Mere Christianity is a little more dense. You got to work for that one a little bit more. It's a little longer.
Yeah.
That one's good too. And the second guy that I wanted to mention is a guy named N.T. Wright. I don't know what the N stands for. T stands for Tom, though. Wright, Wright. He's an Anglican minister. He is probably the most popular and I would say the most prominent biblical New Testament scholar out there.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
He's like the guy. He's your LeBron James, Michael Jordan type in Bible studies right now. Um, he's the guy that's like not only like on the top of his game, like I personally think his interpretation is as good as anybody out there, but
Yeah.
his brand in terms of just being able to write and produce amount of content that's easy to digest and it's like engaging
Mhm.
is also unparalleled. He has two books that I think are really good for this. The first one is called Surprised by Hope. That's actually the second book in the series. The first one I'll mention in a minute, but Surprised by Hope is specifically and explicitly about the resurrection. It's about
Yeah.
Jesus' death, life, resurrection. The subtitle is literally Rethinking Heaven, Hell, and the Resurrection. It cannot be more on the nose and obvious to you. And the title,
Yeah.
Surprised by Hope, I hope you're, get it, I hope you're picking up on how it's influenced Ben and I, especially my language, right?
Yeah.
This was on my this year reading list for me, so I just recently read it. It's very good. But it lays out a very long and detailed case about the resurrection and what it means, and he goes into in multiple pages a lot of the immediate applications, just right on the nose. So if you're kind of wondering what we're talking about, what I'm talking about, great place to go. The other book that he does, it's pretty good. It's called Simply Christian. It's kind of his version of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. It's like the 21st century version.
Mm.
It doesn't go into the same level of detail for resurrection, but the early underpinnings of hope are very very apparent. And even before I read, because I read Surprised by Christian for, or oh my goodness, Simply Christian first before I read Surprised by Hope, because
Mm.
Simply Christian is the first book in his kind of like series ish. That one, it was really good. It was just really powerful, and it just lays out a case to like what it means to be a Christian and like how you live and why you live the way you live, and it just kind of like lays the foundation. He puts hope and resurrection in there. And then in the second book, he really says, okay, now that you kind of got the basics, let's talk about the real meat and potatoes here. Like, let's like get into it. So it's really good, and I definitely recommend you guys read those. Challenge you. NT writes a lot more dense than C.S. Lewis because he is
Mhm.
an actual biblical scholar. So it does take a little more work. I'm not going to lie. It took me about 2 weeks reading about, I would say, about 2 or 3 hours a day to get through him. But I read very attentively and slow. So if you're not like that, then you won't have that same slog.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's all right. No, it's fine.
So if you also want to think about resurrection, you can read J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings because Gandalf is a great example of that too. Literally, when Gandalf comes back, the first thing I notice is that he laughs more and smiles more,
Hmm.
which should tell you something
Yeah.
about hope and joy. But
Hmm.
won't get into that here.